The San Francisco Giants just made a massive decision. Third base coaches should usually not be a talking point, but for the San Francisco Giants through the first 2 months of the season, it was a major one. After some maneuvers at this position, we finally get some direction on where they are headed, and this time it is a much safer hire. My name is Michael Monreal. I'm the host of SF Giants Digest. Welcome back to the channel. Now, before we get into today's video, this one is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 sportsbook app and the best way to get in on the action. We'll dive into some crazy picks later, but thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring today's video, and make sure to click the link in the description and use code DIGEST when signing up. That is the best way to support the channel and helps us continue bringing the best daily Giants content and analysis that there is on YouTube. So thank you again to PrizePicks for sponsoring today's video. Now, back to today's talking point. Obviously, this was one of the bigger talking points of the season so far. Of course, the players not performing, some interesting moves, some interesting media quotes by Tony Vitello. Those are the major topics that have gone on throughout the first 2 months. But this is one that we were not suspecting would be one, and has ended up being a pretty big shakeup in the grand scheme of things. Now, the first news we got of this came a few days ago over the weekend when Bob Nightingale, who's actually been pretty closely reporting on the Giants this year, said the San Francisco Giants demote third base coach Hector Borg after a series of decisions gone wrong. He'll now be in player development. Ron Wotus returns as the third base coach, on an interim basis. Now, just starting off, this was something that a lot of Giants fans were calling for almost a month now. Usually third base coaches aren't a huge talking point unless you're Tim Flannery with a huge windmill rounding the bases. But Hector Borg was a guy who seemed like a good hire at the time, a guy who's been with the organization for a long time. I do know he has rave reviews across the industry, not just within the Giants organization. On Giants Talk the other day, Alex Pavlovich, Giants Insider, did mention that there were some clubs that wanted to hire Hector Borg away. So it seemed like a pretty good fit, although he hadn't had any big league experience coaching third base, of course, and unfortunately that ended up not being true. We just saw some really big mistakes at times where we did not need the risk at third base, and it ended up not being a good fit for him. And you do hate to see it. I know just a few weeks ago his grandmother died in the DR. He flew home for the funeral and all of that, came back, and about a week later is demoted from his position as the Giants third base coach. Although I'm glad he is staying in the organization because, as I mentioned, he has glowing reviews from across Major League Baseball, and he seems like a guy who your organization is going to be better at the end of the day when he is a part of it. Now, I would say a talking point that is not being mentioned a ton in this conversation is that time when he did go to the DR and Ron Wotus was the interim third base coach for, I believe it was 4 or 5 games. And I would say that, yes, it was a small sample, but during those 4 or 5 games, there were no, major mess-ups at third base. As the third base coach, Ron Wotus is obviously a guy who's been in the position before, has been around the game for a very long time. And, Hector Borg is a younger guy in the industry. We just saw a lot of, non-talking points from Ron Wotus when he was the third base coach in the interim 4 or 5 days as Hector Borg was with his family in the DR. And I think that kind of showed the Giants that, hey, when things are going right, at the third base coach position, there should be zero talking points. We should be comfortable, every single send to home, or, we should be okay with all of the decisions they are making. And that just simply wasn't the case with Hector Borg. But in those 4 days, there were zero talking points from Ron Wotus because he's just looked a lot more comfortable at the position. And unfortunately, it did not look the same for Hector Borg. Now, obviously, in the initial announcement about Hector Borg being demoted, Ron Wotus was listed as the interim third base coach. That did not last very long, as we already have a solution as to who the next full-time third base coach of the Giants is going to be. However, before we get into that, I do want to point out that, the day after the demotion came upon us from, Bob Nightingale, all of the Giants beat writers, Tony Vitello was obviously asked in media about what happened. And, this is me just, reading between the lines and going off of what he said. And he never said it directly, but to me, it kind of seemed like the hire of Hector Borg onto his coaching staff was, I don't want to say forced upon him, but heavily pushed. It seemed like Hector Borg was not his, first pick at the position. And, you know that Buster Posey was a big part in this coaching staff. He said he wanted to have his hands over who Tony Vitello wanted to bring in, but in this case specifically, it does seem like Tony Vitello had the idea of bringing Hector Borg on as the third base coach, kind of pushed upon him, which you don't necessarily love to see because Tony Vitello obviously wanted his guys in that coaching staff. But now the Giants make a very comfortable decision as who will be the third base coach moving forward, and that is going to be Gary Pettis. Once again, reported by Bob Nightingale, he said the Giants have hired veteran third base coach Gary Pettis, formerly of the Houston Astros, to become their new third base coach. He replaces Hector Borg, who was removed from the position last week and replaced on an interim basis by Ron Wotus. There you go. Gary Pettis is the new third base coach of the San Francisco Giants. This pick a lot safer than a guy like Hector Borg. He is more of the Ron Washington crop of coaches, not as decorated as Ron Washington, hasn't been around quite as long, but Gary Pettis still a veteran in the industry and has a ton of experience as a third base coach within Major League Baseball. Now, when the Giants announced the move, they gave us a good background on all of Pettis' history in the game. They said Pettis, 68, has 27 years of coaching experience, 22 in the majors, most recently serving as the third base coach for the Houston Astros from 2015 to 2024, meaning he was a coach for them when they won the World Series. Prior to joining Houston, Pettis spent 8 years as a base coach with the Rangers, serving as the third base coach from 2013 to 2014, and first base 2007 to 2012. He was also the first base coach for the White Sox from 01 to 02 and the Mets 03 to 04. In total, Pettis has been a coach for 6 different World Series teams, 2010 and 2011 with Texas, 27, 19, 21, and 22 with Houston, winning the World Series with the Astros in 2017 and 2022. So clearly, this guy has a ton of experience, not only coaching third base, but coaching third base for World Series winning teams. Now, clearly, the Giants are not, I'll say most likely, most definitely not winning a World Series this year with how the season has gone, but it's still nice to have this guy who I'm assuming will be the third base coach next year, the year after that, however long Tony Vitello is here with the Giants. So an interesting pick, but as of now, it seems like an A+ hire. All of the reviews are glowing on this guy, and obviously he's been in a third base coach's box for World Series winning teams. He has the experience, and as I've mentioned, a few times already in this video, just a significantly safer pick in that box over on the third base line as compared to a guy like Hector Borg, who I still think has a bright future as a coach in this league, but it might have been a little early for him to be a full-time third base coach on a big league squad. Obviously, wish Hector Borg all of the best luck in the future, but as it currently stands, Gary Pettis is your new third base coach of the San Francisco Giants after some interesting few weeks at that position. Now, before we get out of here, I did mention we'd get into some specific picks from Prize Picks, and this one seems like it is way too obvious. Kyle Harrison, I would go more than 6.5 strikeouts against the Giants in just about 2 hours. He's a guy who, obviously a lefty, the Giants struggle against lefties, but he has looked like a real Cy Young candidate this year. He looks like exactly what the Giants thought he would be when he was the best left-handed pitching prospect in baseball. Obviously, you still do that Devers trade 10 out of 10 times, but Kyle Harrison looking like an ace, and I would go more than 6.5 strikeouts. Prize Picks also has some really great promotions going on, including Taco Tuesday. The tacos are going nowhere. Our board is serving up discounted projections on Tuesday all day long. Once again, use the link in the description to download Prize Picks and use code DIGEST to get started on Prize Picks today. New users get $50 instantly in their lineups when playing your first $5, and as I've mentioned time and time again, it helps the channel continue to bring the best Giants content and analysis there is on YouTube. So thank you once again to Prize Picks for sponsoring today's video. Now, before we close out, I think it was glaringly obvious that, Hector Borg may not have been the right fit for this job. I would say, the first few weeks of the season, we saw some interesting hiccups at the position, some interesting sends. One that stands out to me is when he sent Luis Ariz to third on that double that should not have been a triple, but for some reason he sent him to third. Obviously, the send of Willy Adames a few days ago was very bad when the Diamondbacks kind of bobbled the ball in left field and he sent Adames home. It wasn't even close. So an interesting few weeks at the position, but now we get a resolution. Gary Pettis, the new third base coach of the Giants, moving forward. Make sure to go down below, leave a comment what you think of the hire. I would have to imagine that fans like this hire just because it's safer. There shouldn't be as much question marks over there, but let me know what you think down below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video and have been enjoying the videos over the past few weeks, make sure to hit that subscribe button.